करती हूँ कि आज जो हमें चेयर के रूप में प्राप्त हैं डॉक्टर सुदर्शन आयंगर जी, तो उन्हें पुस्तक स्मृति चिन्ह एवं साल से सम्मानित करें। डॉक्टर सुदर्शन आयंगर जी गुजरात विद्यापीठ अहमदाबाद में कुलपति हैं। गुजरात अर्थशास्त्र परिषद के कॉन्फ्रेंस प्रेसिडेंट रहे हैं। आपने सामाजिक आर्थिक संस्थाओं से जुड़े हुए हैं। आप पूर्ण रूप से गांधीवादी विचारधारा के तहत अपना जीवन बिताने वाले हैं। सर, आपका हम जोरदार तालियों से स्वागत करते हैं। आज हमें जो वक्ता के रूप में प्राप्त हैं ऐसे डॉक्टर लीलाबेन विसरिया जी का भी पुस्तक स्मृति चिन्ह एवं साल से सम्मान करने के लिए मैं डॉक्टर रोहित शुक्ला जी को आमंत्रित करती हूँ। डॉक्टर लीलाबेन विसरिया, प्रिंसेट यूनिवर्सिटी से पीएचडी की पदवी आपने प्राप्त की है। जीआईडीआर के प्राध्यापक एवं डायरेक्टर रहे हैं और वर्तमान में भी आप वहाँ पर सेवारत हैं। हम आपका भी जोरदार तालियों से स्वागत करते हैं मैडम। धन्यवाद। अब मैं डॉक्टर सुदर्शन आयंगर जी को आमंत्रित करती हूँ कि वे हमें आज के वक्ता और विषय से अवगत कराएं। डॉक्टर सुदर्शन आयंगर जी।
नमस्कार। डॉक्टर डीटी लाकड़ावाला मेमोरियल लेक्चर में आप सबका स्वागत है। बेटी ने हिंदी में बात शुरू की है तो मैं हिंदी में चला रहा हूँ। मेरे दक्षिण भारतीय मित्रों को हिंदी में आपत्ति नहीं होगी ऐसा मान के मैं चल रहा हूँ। અને આપણને બધાને તો હિન્દી ફાવે છે। ये परंपरा 17 साल से चल रही है। लाकड़ावाला साहब is known to all of us. He had the desire that we present the best to the teachers of economics in Gujarat. इसीलिए ये प्रथा और परंपरा जारी है। उसी परंपरा को जारी रखते हुए आज के इस डीटी लाकड़ावाला मेमोरियल लेक्चर के विदुषी वक्ता प्रोफेसर लीला विसारिया हैं। उनके बारे में परिचय देना मुश्किल इसीलिए भी है क्योंकि उनके साथ सालों तक इतना नज़दीक से काम किया है कि अपने नज़दीकी व्यक्ति का परिचय देना कभी कभी कठिन हो जाता है। पर इसके बावजूद उनका हम परिचय करें। लीला बहन सोशियोलॉजिस्ट डेमोग्राफर हैं। ऐसे कॉम्बिनेशन बहुत कम होते हैं और दोनों विषयों में आपको विद्वता हासिल है। लीलाबेन कच्छ की हैं मूलतः, पर वो चेन्नई में बड़ी हुई हैं जिसको पहले मद्रास कहा जाता था और वहीं पर उन्होंने कॉलेज के अभ्यास किया है। उसके बाद बम्बई और उसके बाद प्रिंसटन यूनिवर्सिटी में पीएचडी उन्होंने किया और उसके बाद जो है उन्होंने रिसर्च का ही काम बहुत ज़्यादा किया। जहाँ तक मुझे ख्याल है वहाँ तक हेल्थ, एजुकेशन, इन दो विषयों पर आज अगर हिंदुस्तान में किसी सोशल साइंटिस्ट के पास गहरी समझ है और वो समझ इस देश के विभिन्न राज्यों के अभ्यासों के बाद ये समझ पैदा हुई है, तो ऐसे कुछ लोगों में लीला विसारिया का नाम आता है। हमारे लिए सौभाग्य की बात है कि उनका एक बहुत लंबा अरसा गुजरात में बीता है उनके काम का, और अभी भी वो गुजरात इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ डेवलपमेंट रिसर्च की मानद प्रोफेसर हैं अपनी निवृत्ति के बाद। जाहिर है कि जब उन्होंने इतना रिसर्च का काम किया है तो उनके बहुत अच्छे पर्चे, रिसर्च पेपर्स राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय जर्नल्स में प्रकाशित हुए हैं। कई किताबें हैं और डेमोग्राफी के क्षेत्र में इन्होंने अपनी अलग पहचान बनाई है। मुझे इसीलिए जोड़ना पड़ेगा क्योंकि डेमोग्राफी के क्षेत्र में पहचान बनाने वाली लीला बहन, उनका विवाह प्रोफेसर प्रवीण विसारिया के साथ हुआ था, जिनको हम सब जानते हैं। तो प्रोफेसर विसारिया अपने आप में डेमोग्राफी जगत के एक तरह से हिंदुस्तान में पितामह थे, और उनके साथ रहकर काम करना हमको पता है कितना कठिन है, और ये ज़रा उनके ज़्यादा साथ में थी तो इनके लिए और भी कठिन हुआ होगा। पर ऐसी कठिनता के साथ काम करके लीला बहन निखरी हैं, और उसका निखार दिखाई देता है। एशियन पॉपुलेशन एसोसिएशन की ये बनने के बाद उसकी पहली प्रेसिडेंट थी। तो इतना सम्मान जो है हमारी भारतीय महिला को, गुजरात की महिला को मिला है, और जाहिर है कि कई प्रकार के संस्थाओं के साथ उनके बोर्ड में मेंबर की और तरह सलाहकार की तरह से जुड़ी हुई हैं। एक बहुत ही बढ़िया संस्था जिसको हम जानते हैं पॉपुलेशन रेफरेंस ब्यूरो, उसकी वो 6 साल तक उसके ट्रस्टी रह चुकी हैं, जो बहुत ही सम्मानित जगह है। एक बात का मैं अंत में जिक्र ये करना चाहूँगा, चूँकि लीला बहन का परिचय बहुत लंबा दिया जा सकता है, पर अब इस परिचय से आपको ये तो ख्याल आ गया होगा कि लीला बहन की गहराई और पहुँच, व्याप जो है उनका काफ़ी है, इसीलिए मैं ज़्यादा समय नहीं लगाऊंगा। पर चूँकि इस कॉन्फ्रेंस में विद्यार्थीगण भी आए हुए हैं, तो मेरा ये अनुरोध है कि एक लैंडमार्क पुस्तक जो रॉबर्ट कार्सन, टिम डाइसन और लीला विसारिया तीनों ने मिल करके लिखी है, 21st सेंचुरी इंडिया, ऑक्सफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी बुक्स ने उसको पब्लिश किया है। ये भाई अभी लाए शायद नहीं होंगे जो किताबें ले आए हैं, क्योंकि किताब 2004 में छपी थी, तो 4 वाला एडिशन तो ये अभी नहीं रखते हैं, क्योंकि 12-13 में तो कई और नई निकल गई हैं। पर मेरा आप सब से ये सुझाव है कि अगर भारत की डेमोग्राफी को समझना है, और विशेष करके 21st सेंचुरी की डेमोग्राफी, उसके प्रोजेक्शन, उसके मेथड्स और उसकी इंसाइट्स, सूझ, हाँ, ये सब बातें अगर समझनी है तो हम सबको ये किताब पढ़नी चाहिए। इस किताब को मैंने रख रखा है, जब मुझे ज़रूरत पड़ती है तो मैं उसको निकाल के पढ़ता हूँ, जब भी आवश्यकता होती है तो मैं ये सुझाव करता हूँ। बहुत ही सहृदय महिला हैं। आदमी का विदुषी या विद्वान होना अपने में पूरा नहीं है, पर एक इंसानियत की महक, एक इंसानियत की ऊष्मा भी साथ में होनी चाहिए। लीला बहन के साथ हमारा संबंध बहुत पुराना है, उस हिसाब से कह रहा हूँ। शायद लीला बहन ये भी कहेंगी कि तुम प्रेमवश कह रहे हो, पर वो हो सकता है, पर मैं आपको ये भी यकीन दिलाना चाहता हूँ कि एक बहुत ही ऊष्मा भरी संवेदनशील व्यक्तित्व को आज हम सुनेंगे, जिनका विषय है डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड। और मेरी बेटी ने ये कहा कि ये वक्ता के साथ साथ विषय का भी परिचय कराएंगे। विषय का परिचय तो वक्ता ही कराएंगे, क्योंकि वही जानते हैं उस विषय के बारे में। डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड के बारे में हम लोगों ने सुना होगा, और उसी के बारे में अच्छी चर्चा होगी, क्योंकि वो डेमोग्राफर हैं। और एक अवसर है इस देश के पास कि ये देश उस काल से गुजर रहा है जहां आने वाले कुछ सालों तक इस देश की आबादी में युवा आबादी सबसे ज़्यादा होगी। अब ये युवा आबादी ताकत भी है और कमज़ोरी भी बन सकती है। तो अब हम सुने इन डेमोग्राफर से, इस विदुषी डेमोग्राफर से, कि ये जो हमारी बस्ती है, आबादी है, जो हमारी युवा आबादी है, उसमें कितनी ताकत कहाँ है, क्या क्या ताकतें हैं और क्या क्या कमज़ोरियाँ हैं। इससे ज़्यादा समय मैं नहीं लेना चाहता हूँ, और अब आप उन्हें बुलाएंगी या मैं बुलाऊंगा, तो हमारे लिए लीला बहन का खूब स्वागत है, और अब हम उनका वक्तव्य सुनेंगे।
मैं अपना वक्तव्य अंग्रेजी में आपके समक्ष रखूंगी। हिंदी का ज्ञान तो मेरा बहुत कम है और गुजराती में मैंने ये वक्तव्य तैयार नहीं किया है, अंग्रेजी में किया है, इसीलिए अंग्रेजी में ही आपके साथ आपके समक्ष ये बात करूंगी। फर्स्ट एंड फॉरमोस्ट, I must thank Sudarshan Iyengar for very, very kind words. I don't think I deserve most of them, but he has always been extremely kind to not just me, but also to my ex-husband, late husband. This is a lecture in the memory of Professor Lakdawala. I knew Professor Lakdawala when I was a student doing my MA in Bombay University. He was a very distant figure for very young students because even in those days, in the late 60s, he was a tall man. But when I, over the years, got to know him, I discovered that he was a very, very approachable person, had a great sense of humor if one came to know him personally. And there are a whole lot of incidents and things that he have told us. I still remember and I still chuckle because he had a great sense of humor. So I am deeply touched by this invitation from the Gujarat Economic Society. Let me at the outset admit that I'm not an economist. I'm a sociologist by training and a demographer. And to talk on a subject like demographic dividend, which is basically in the literature of economists, very sociologists have been writing on this issue because economists identify themselves with this. So please pardon me if I make some mistakes or if I say things as a sociologist which may not be very palatable to the economists. As I mentioned, being trained in demography, I was actually edged by Professor Sudarshan Iyengar to talk to this august audience on demographic dividend. I have worked on a number of issues, but demographic dividend is something that I'd been reading about it, but I'd never written on it before. Because while the concept has received a lot of attention from media, from academics, and especially economists, even planners and policy makers, and now increasingly from private companies and corporate sectors, I think we need to understand what is meant by demographic dividend. Basically, what the economists, not just in India, very few economists in India have been working on this, but economists around the world have presented theoretical and empirical evidence and arguments to show that the rapid economic growth of a few Asian countries, East Asian countries, such as Thailand, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, was spurred by its rapid decline in fertility in the 1970s and 1980s, which in turn led to an age structure. The whole issue of demographic dividend is about the age composition or the age structure of the population, which led to an age structure which became very favorable to economic growth. They have also estimated that demographic change has accounted for approximately 2 percentage point increase in the per capita income of the population of these countries, and about a third of the total miracle growth of these countries. This is a huge achievement thanks to the changing age structure. And therefore, these countries have been called the Asian tigers. China is currently experiencing rapid economic growth thanks to the demographic dividend resulting from rapid decline in its fertility, thanks to one-child norm to a certain extent, and a bulge in the working age population. And now there is a sense of optimism, as Sudarshan pointed out, in India, that India's economic growth will also head north, thanks to the recent fertility decline and the resultant favorable age structure. So India's future suddenly becomes or appears quite bright. We need to examine how bright our future is. So I'll therefore spend the next 35-40 minutes to share with you what we mean by so-called demographic dividend, which is sometimes also known as demographic bonus, how it works, and whether India is at a stage to benefit from it. So I'll first explain what we mean by demographic dividend. Along with that, I will also discuss briefly what kind of demographic changes create a situation of a window of opportunity. We call it a window of opportunity, and give rise to the possibility of a dividend or a bonus. The demographic changes relate to decline in both fertility and mortality, which is known as demographic transition, typically, and it changes the population's age structure. I will next spend a few minutes trying to discuss whether and to what extent India is poised to take advantage of this dividend. With the steady decline in mortality, evident for now in India now for 40, 50 years, and in fertility, decline in fertility since about 1980, 1985, there is a sense of optimism in many quarters in India that India will become the next rising tiger. When several, and why India becomes a rising tiger? Because several East Asian countries, whose names I mentioned earlier, including China, would have completed taking advantage of dividend and will be exiting from that phase. For a country, but India, because the decline in fertility has happened at a much later stage, we are entering the demographic dividend stage. But I think what we need to understand, and that is what I will focus on towards the end, is that a country as diverse and heterogeneous as India, we have to ask a few hard questions. It's okay. Are all regions and all social groups of the country experiencing the demographic change at the same time and at the same pace? I think this is something that we have to address ourselves to. Are all states and social groups poised to take advantage of this change in the age structure? Have we begun making investments in human capital, especially education and health, also infrastructure, that are needed to spur economic growth? These are some of the questions in whose context we have to understand the demographic dividend in our country. Thank you. I think I want to point out at the outset also that the fruits of demographic change are not automatic. Demographic dividend, taking advantage of demographic dividend is not at all automatic. Neither do they last forever. demographic dividend of any country lasts only for about 30 to 40 years. And during those 30 or 40 years and a few years preceding that period, if we fail to take advantage of this change, I think we will miss the bus, or we would have missed the bus. A nation or a population can fritter away the advantage and thereby reach a situation of despair. There are several economists like David Bloom who have argued that demography is not destiny. Demographic change may provide a boost to economic growth, but unless appropriate policies are put in place, we may not achieve the fruits of demographic dividend. In fact, we may even find ourselves in a situation where the number of unemployed and underemployed working age people will swell our population and can create issues like social unrest. And this scenario would clearly lead to demographic disaster. Therefore, in order to make the most of the opportunity presented to us due to demographic changes for a limited period, the countries have to start investing in human capital in advance of the onset of this window of opportunity, and investments have to be made not just in quantity, but also in quality of education and health. And at the same time, we need to have sound economic and governance policies which can attract investment, which can boost savings. So let me spend a few minutes to say what is exactly demographic dividend. Demographic dividend is an accelerated economic growth that would result from a decline in countries' mortality, as I mentioned earlier, and fertility, and the subsequent changes in the age structure. When fewer births take place each year, a country's young dependent population grows smaller in relation to the working age population. With fewer people to support, a country has a window of opportunity for rapid economic growth if the right policies are in place. So the first step in achieving demographic dividend is to go through demographic transition, that is decline in mortality with some time lag, a decline in fertility. There is invariably in almost all the countries of the world, there is a lag in the decline. Mortality declines first. People realize that mortality has declined, that the number of children that people have are surviving and not dying in infancy or in early childhood. And so they change and adjust their behavior. And so then they decide to have fewer children, and that is how fertility begins to decline. So the average number of children falls, but because of the recent history of high fertility, the number of people in the working ages, that is 15 to 59 or 15 to 64, suddenly appear bulging. There are more people in the working ages compared to those in the younger ages. The young typically are dependent on the older people and consume a lot of our resources because we need to educate them, we need to provide them good health, etc. We need to build schools, build hospitals. And so, you know, a lot of our resources are diverted towards the young people, which some of them, because there will be fewer young people, some of those resources will be saved and can be used for growth. So as long as child dependency continues to decrease, the window remains open. Eventually, those in the working ages move up in age ladder. That is, they become older with the passage of time, with the decline in adult mortality also. So people in the age group 65 plus or 60 plus start increasing and signaling the end of the demographic dividend. So because then there will be more old people again who need to be supported because they suffer from chronic illnesses which require long-term treatment, health care. So again, there will be a change, and basically what happens is that the window of opportunity available to any country, including India, lasts about 30 to 40 years. So the people who believe that if this opportunity is taken advantage of, it can lead to positive outcomes for nations. And this opens a distinct possibility because there are more people in the working ages, fewer people to support. So there is a possibility of diverting, as I said, some of the resources from investing in children to investing in physical capital or infrastructure, job training, and technological progress to boost growth. They also facilitate, when women have fewer children or bear fewer children, they become available to participate in work also. And so the demographic dividend or the demographic change can also facilitate and increase women's participation in gainful work. Also, when people, young people, working people are earning well, they also save some of their income, which becomes a key or further accumulates into physical and human capital, which can be used, the savings can be used for further physical and human capital on technological innovation. So basically, when people start living longer, they want to save for that age beyond which they reach or above which they reach. And therefore, the propensity to save also can increase among those who are working. So this is how demographic dividend works. What is the Indian situation? Why is there an optimism in some quarters? Because India is on the threshold of reaping the benefits of demographic change, which is evident in the decline in mortality and fertility, increase in life expectancy, and decrease in young population, and increase in working age population. Death rate in India has come down to about 7 per 1,000 population as of now. Life expectancy of people has gone up to 65 years, little more than 65 for females now, women compared to men. Fertility has started declining, and the total fertility rate or the number of children born to a woman is down to about 2.5 now. 2.5 is considered as a replacement level fertility. We are a few notches above that, but fertility, which was close to 6 not too long ago, is down to less than half that level in India. The proportion of population below 15 years of age declined from 41% in 1961 to 35% in 2001, and now is believed to be around 31% in 2010 or 11. the proportion of population in the working ages, 15 to 59, that is how India defines working ages. Majority of the countries talk in terms of 15 to 64. Has increased from 53% in 1961 to 62% in 2011. Of India's 1.2 billion population, nearly 750 million are today in the working ages. A majority, and by 2025 or 2030, when we will be close to reaching the end of our demographic transition, this figure, the people in the working ages 15 to 59 will be close to 1 billion, which is just only little less than the current population. So the growth rate of the working age population is faster in India. A majority of the youth or new entrants to will want to enter the labor market. And therefore, we need to discuss this issue. What do we do with these new entrants to the labor market? And that is why the questions arise. Can India take advantage of and benefit from this large population in productive ages? What would be needed to achieve and sustain reasonable growth in the coming decades? The Asian tigers were able to take advantage of the demographic dividend because they had made a significant and continued investment in education of their young. So when these young people reached the working ages or entered the labor force, the countries had a fairly well-educated labor force who could be productively employed and who contributed to the economic development of their countries. So when standing on the threshold of demographic dividend, is India in a similar position? Is India made the necessary investment or is likely to make the necessary investment in human capital in the coming decades, or has it started making it? I will address this issue, investment in human capital, basically with reference to education and health. We need to closely examine whether and to what extent we have invested in education of our young. No doubt, in the last 2 decades especially, there has been a sizable increase in literacy among both men and women in our countries. The 2011 census data, which were released last year, or in 2011 itself, 74% of our population aged 7 and above was reported as literate. The definition of literacy, according to our census, is very, very liberal. Anybody who says, I can read and write with some understanding is classified as literate. The proportion of young children enrolled in schools and attending schools has also increased significantly in the past 2 decades, but the dropout rate continues to be quite high. People enter school, people may attend school, but then after reaching a certain stage, nearly half of these children, even before completing the primary cycle of education, drop out. Further, those who have already entered the labor force, what is their education level? According to the 2001 census data, because the 2011 census data are not yet in public domain, in the age group, young people, 15 to 24 years of old, majority of students here fall in that category, nearly 25% were illiterate. Quarter of these young people in our country were illiterate. And today, because I'm talking of the 2011 data, today they would be in the prime working ages of 24 to 34 years of old. Majority of would have completed their schooling, their education, or would be looking for jobs or are in the labor market. Among the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe population, 41% of children or 41% of those in the age group 15 to 24, or 2 out of 5, were illiterate. A large proportion of illiterate and semi-literate would end up finding employment mostly in unorganized sector and in low-paid employment. Why are we at this stage, even today? Given the manner in which the Indian education system is structured, the children find it very difficult to enter or re-enter the school system once they have crossed the age at which children normally enter school. There are a few small experiments in the form of bridge courses for dropout or never enrolled children, but those few experiments cannot address the problem that is huge. For those who stay in school, quality of education continues to be such that many children who come from poor families and are first generation learners do not acquire even the minimum level of literacy or skills to move out of the poverty trap. There's another concern. India's policy is often, according to me, quite lopsided. The focus on education, the lopsided focus on education is evident when there's a talk of meta-university or virtual universities, which are talked about in the context of rising aspirations of middle class, English-speaking people who aspire to receive the best higher education. In fact, India has some excellent educational institutes and produce some excellent students. Undoubtedly, higher education of good quality has an important role to play in unlocking potential of demographic dividend. That is how countries have done well, many other countries. But to fail millions of students who attend schools, state schools or public schools, government schools, who do not acquire even basic language and math skills, I think we are failing millions of our young children. The 2012 Annual Status of Education report, prepared by an NGO called Pratham, and they've been doing this since 2005, and so there are now 8 such reports available, and they basically examine the situation in rural areas or the rural education, and they've pointed out that over time, if you look at all these reports, consecutively, that the performance of children has deteriorated rather than improved in rural schools. A large percent of new entrants to labor force are going to be poorly educated, will lack skills that are needed to absorb them in industrial or technology sectors, which basically spur growth. The deterioration is greater in large North Indian states compared to the southern states. Situation is much worse in predominantly tribal districts compared to the other districts. So unless attention is paid to improve the quality of primary and upper primary education for all, inequity between regions and between population groups would increase and accentuate the gap between the rich and the poor. along with providing funds to realize the goal of access, equity, and quality in higher education, emphasis on improving the quality of primary and upper primary education in rural India needs to be emphasized. The country needs to address structural and systemic problems in its education and training systems. We need to elevate skill levels from the bottom up, in addition to striving for excellence at the top of the education ladder. Maybe we have not completely missed the bus. I keep asking myself this question: have we missed the bus, or are we likely to miss the bus? Maybe not. I think the optimist in me often says, no, there is still a hope. We can focus on providing young people quality education and training, retain them in education institutions, and avert frustrations and social problems. We can do it. That will be the dividend. The dividend will be to empower our young. It will be a disaster if we fail to put in place a policy and framework where they can be empowered. I think that is where we need to work. Now I'll spend a few minutes to talk about health. Health and longevity are very important for economic performance. Sometimes, but this is often not recognized. People, and especially, sorry to say this, but economists and policymakers view health as a social indicator that improves only when countries become wealthy. Health improves only when there's more money, when the people can spend on health care. But if one recognizes that health is an instrument for economic growth and not simply a consequence of it, and if state and individuals in creating conditions for healthy living, the productivity of the workforce will improve. Healthier workforce is a productive workforce. Healthier children have better cognitive development, tend to stay in school longer, have better records of school attendance, and which result in more educated workforce. That is why health is important. But our health indicators leave a lot to be desired. According to this 2007 WHO report, which is the latest that I could, where I could find data, some data related to adult mortality, India is among the highest in lower middle income countries as far as adult mortality is concerned. Some of the African poor countries are also doing better than us. More than 20% of India's adults die in adult ages. This vulnerability is higher among males than among females. The mortality among adult population is due to several factors, several causes. There's widespread use of tobacco products leading to premature death. Deaths due to vehicular accidents, and the vehicular accidents are increasing even in rural areas. Increasing due to lifestyle-related factors. The loss of an earning member is not only a loss for the household, but it's also a loss for the nation. There's another health concern, which is related to the high morbidity among the adults. Morbidity data are not very dependable, they're very scarce, they have lots of questions and issues about it, but nonetheless, let me say that according to the National Sample Survey, 52nd round report, 33 to 35 persons out of 1,000 in the age group 15 to 64 in rural and urban areas were reported to be chronically morbid. They had some chronic ailments. And another significant proportion of adults suffer from acute diseases. The various ailments which keep people away from work, and if in spite of the health problems, some do continue to work because they have no choice or alternative, Their productivity tends to be quite low. This has to be understood. This issue has to be understood in the context not only of the loss to the economy, but also in the context of soaring healthcare burden on the households. Morbidity and mortality among the adult population in recent years is also due to the changing disease pattern. India is, there is an epidemiological transition that's going on in our country, and the deaths due to non-communicable diseases are increasing. And those non-communicable diseases often are related to lifestyle issues, and diseases like diabetes, cardiac ailments, cancers are increasing. There is enough evidence to show that. But at the same time, communicable diseases are still with us. Communicable diseases such as tuberculosis, malaria, waterborne diseases like diarrhea, they do take a heavy toll both on mortality and on morbidity. Expenditure on treatment of acute and chronic diseases in the event of no health insurance, and majority of Indians do not have health insurance, implies that the household taps on its savings, if any, borrows money, or even sells assets to meet the expenses. The poor are the most vulnerable group and get into the trap. There's another issue about health which is often not talked about in the debate on India's demographic dividend, and that is malnutrition. According to the National Family Health Survey, which was conducted in 2005-06, 48% of children, this is India's figures, there are state variations, under 5 were observed to be stunted, 4% were severely stunted, 43% were underweight. In other words, nearly half of our children suffer from malnutrition. Poverty is one obvious cause, but maternal malnutrition and anemia are very important causes for low birth weight babies, and this low birth weight continues to manifest itself in malnutrition and stunting. Malnourished children are found to have poor cognitive development and are poor school achievers. An inability to comprehend what is being taught in school, which is often not easy to comprehend even for a lot of others, leads to poor performance or failure, which in turn leads to lack of interest in studies, and ultimately such children stop attending school. They join workforce as poorly educated, poorly skilled people. So if we fail to invest in the right kind of education and health of our people and children, there is every chance that instead of dividend, we can end up with a large segment of adult population with poor training and skills that do not match the skills required for a growing and globalized economy, and can instead lead to social unrest. Just 2 small points I want to make while concluding. And it's something that we need to recognize, that in the short run, demographic changes can lead to higher inequality. And I think a lot of people ignore this possibility, or this possibility. And why does it lead to higher inequality? because the rich are the first to take advantage of the demographic dividend. The rich would lower their fertility faster, provide good education and health to their few children. They have fewer children, and these children can participate in and benefit from the economic development. Poor families face a demographic income trap. Poor and illiterate parents produce children in the next generation and these children are raised in poverty and fail to acquire quality education. And this is what would increase the gap in the short run between the rich and the poor. This divergence would accentuate between states within India, between rural and middle class and the rural marginalized groups. And unless the state intervention at this juncture fails in its policies or fails to put good policies in place which help to achieve convergence and not accentuate divergence, I think this will become a reality for us. Another point that needs to be highlighted is that although with demographic transition, the age structure becomes favorable for enhancing growth, this does not happen automatically. Growth of the industrial and service sectors that provide employment opportunities for the rapidly growing working age population and the increase of women entering labor force would require foresight, resources, and progressive policies and governance structures. And if these are not in place, I think we will miss the bus. There's another last point which I can't help making, and that is the divergence or the disparities between the states and how the Indian states try to overcome. We have states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar where fertility has only very recently started declining, and the pace is likely to accelerate. I think the demographers do believe that the pace of fertility decline, even in those states, will accelerate in the coming decades. They will enter a demographic dividend phase later compared to some of the southern states. But the worrying concern of mine is that unlike Kerala, whose labor force was quite well educated, because education in Kerala started many decades ago, and population hopefully was also quite skilled. But Kerala's economy did not grow. The employment opportunities in Kerala did not grow for various political and other reasons. And so what did Kerala do? Kerala sent a large percent of its workforce to Gulf countries and somehow states of India, and somehow overcame that problem. Now, the states, large states like Uttar Pradesh with 200 million population today and Bihar do not have that possibility. Do not have that possibility of sending a large proportion of their population to other countries, to Gulf countries. And so, these are the states where instead of reaping the benefits of dividend, can lead to social unrest and violence unless the states wake up. I think. Thank you.
मैडम आपनो खूब खूब आभार. सभा अहिया मंडप में उपस्थित सब बधा माटे एक विशेष जानकारी. गई काले स्पेट रिसर्च जर्नल इन सोशल सायन्स जेनु विमोचन करायु ते बुक आप सर्वे बुक स्टॉल परथी मेळवी शको छो तथा तेना मेम्बरशीप बनवा माटेनु कार्य बहार बुक स्टॉल पर चालू छे. जे पण तेना मेम्बर बनवा मांगता होय ते बहार बुक स्टॉल पर आ कार्यक्रम पत्या पछी संपर्क करे. હવે હું આગળનો કાર્યભાર સરને સોંપું છું. ડૉક્ટર સુદર્શન આયંગરજી સર, આગળનો કાર્યભાર હું આપને સોંપું છું સર.
Thank you, Leelaben, for this very precise, meticulous presentation on the demographic dividend and despair. We open this lecture now for questions, comments, but I think we should do that in next 10 minutes. Yes, for next 10 minutes we will have questions and comments, and I would request our friends to just pass on the mic.
Hello, madam. My point is the ZPG theory and demographic dividend can go together or paradoxical? Is ZPG theory and demographic dividend can coexist or paradoxical? Theory and a demographic dividend can coexist or paradoxical.
As I mentioned, not an economist, and therefore my thinking doesn't move the way you articulate these questions. But no, they can't, in my opinion, can't go together. They basically, the whole idea, I mean, the word dividend itself means there is a bonus, there is an economic growth, there is a growth. And therefore, in order to, I mean, the whole system operates in a manner that you save enough, you invest in program, I mean, in activities which produce positive growth, a positive income. And that is how the benefits, that is how people stop being poor and reach a stage. That is what dividend is, and that is what the whole optimism is, that the percent of population which is living below poverty line will decrease with dividend. And but otherwise I won't know whether how LP or ZPG, as you call it, and demographic dividend works. To me, demographic dividend means there is a positive growth.
I think the Asian Tigers experience, which was quoted, experienced 2% rise in per capita income due to demographic dividend, which also means that the per capita incomes will grow when there is a growth in the economy. So ZPG will definitely not amount to a non-growth situation. Actually, we should now get into a degrowth theory also, in the sense that if you have to take care of the ecology, then we also now have to talk about degrowth and see whether the same demographic dividends will operate. But this all assumption would be what kind of economy and society you want to form. So I think it would be a larger question. Thank you.
I am Parmanand Singh from Bihar. My question is with regard to the generalization made by Madam that the Indian economy is facing low rate of morbidity. My point is that it is not the low rate of morbidity, but it is because of low level of morbidity perception, which is a civic function, which is a function of the intellectual class, and where also a state is involved. So what India needs is that better health and hygiene consciousness. That is the duty on our part. Number one. Number two, in Bihar, we see that there is high fertility rate. It is 3+%. And growth is also taking place there. That growth is because of the centrality of the work on the part of the poor household that Madam Elaine emphasized. And that because of the remittances that the migrant labor give to the state, which is more than 1,000 crore per year. So this situation will also be analyzed threadbarely in order to make the perception of demographic dividend clear to the common man's mind. Thank you, ma'am.
I think maybe I wasn't very clear, but I said morbidity load is quite high in India. There are issues of measuring morbidity. There is an issue of people's perception. The people who may have low temperature do not recognize that they are unwell because they need to work and therefore participate in, they go for work. So there is, but the morbidity load from whatever surveys the few surveys that I have seen, morbidity load in India is quite high. And so I think I probably did not communicate it very well. It's not low, it is quite high. Yes, hygiene and public health, etc. are concerns. Sanitation is an issue, and that is why some of the communicable diseases still are amongst us, because those are maybe state subjects, and therefore enough attention is not paid to them. As far as Bihar is concerned, yes, with high fertility, and even in Bihar fertility is falling, the possibility of remittances is certainly there. The possibility of remittances was there for Kerala's working age population also. But given the large number of political and other issues about migration to other states, I think instead of relying on remittances and allowing remittances to give boost to Bihar's economy or growth, I think we need to look within the state and address this issue. Remember, majority of the Biharis who have migrated to other parts of the country, to Maharashtra, to even Gujarat, elsewhere, tend to be manual workers, have low skills, and therefore, yes, they live in dire poverty wherever they have gone. And I have seen in Surat, many of them live 6 or 7 to a room, barely eke out their living in order to support their families back in Bihar. But that is not the way a state can hope to grow for a long period of time.
Madam, when we come to talk about the Indian economy at a macro level, the picture is very rosy. We are growing and we have become the second largest economy in the world. But when we come down to the internal micro level Indian economy, the rural-urban disparity is a bit worrying. So far as demographic dividend is concerned, Madam, my question is that how long will it take for India to erase this disparity between rural and urban, so that we can have a qualitative human labor force that can take India to the first largest economy?
Thank you. I don't tell forecasts. I wouldn't know how long it will take. I can only picture or present the current scenario and also say that the demographic dividend cannot last forever. It can last at the most 35 to 40 years. There may be a second demographic dividend of a smaller version, the echo effect. But that, I didn't want to get into those issues. So, you know, during these 30 or 40 years, and few years before this phase that we have entered, we have already entered, if we haven't addressed these issues, we still have time, and that's why I say we haven't missed the bus, we still have time to address some of these issues. And if with the right political environment, policies, better governance, etc., if we are able to address, I think we may be able to narrow the gap. I don't think the gap will ever go away, because those who do well in rural areas tend to migrate to urban areas. And therefore, you know, what you leave behind in rural areas is what existed 15 or 20 years ago. The situation, I mean, the population is becoming highly urbanized. Maybe 40+% of India's population unofficially lives in urban areas, but that even that urbanization is not going to increase very rapidly, at least so we are told. So I don't know when the gap will go away, or you know, the convergence will take place. I think all of us would want convergence to take place, but I think we have to address a large number of related issues.
Thank you, ma'am.
One more question from young student, if it comes. That will be the last one, yeah, after this.
It's a problem of not quantity, but quality also. Do you agree with this statement? And you know that Indian population has increased faster than food supply by leaps and bounds. So some remedial measures, either by government, should be quick rather. Otherwise there will be so many problems, food problems and starvation in future after some years. So what do you feel on this point?
Well, to start with, don't view